In 1212, 10 powerful Datus from Borneo made a decision that would change Philippine history forever. Led by Datu Puti, these Bornean chieftains abandoned their homeland and set sail across dangerous waters to conquer Panay Island. This wasn't just migration. This was an invasion that established one of the earliest recorded kingdoms in the Philippines. The story of how these 10 Datus conquered Panay Island reveals a sophisticated pre-colonial civilization that most history books ignore. The tale begins not in the Philippines, but in Borneo, where tyranny forced these leaders to flee. According to the Maragtas chronicles, Datu Sumakwel and 9 other Datus served under Sultan Makatunao, a brutal ruler whose oppression became unbearable. These weren't desperate refugees. They were established leaders with wealth, warriors, and families. When Makatunao's cruelty reached its peak, the 10 Datus made a calculated decision. They would leave Borneo entirely and find a new homeland across the sea. The expedition required massive preparation. Each Datu commanded his own barangay, a fleet of boats carrying not just warriors, but entire communities. We're talking hundreds of people per Datu, families, craftsmen, farmers, and skilled navigators. They brought livestock, seeds for planting, weapons, gold, and the tools necessary to establish a new civilization. This wasn't a desperate escape. It was a planned colonization mission. The journey across the Sulu Sea was treacherous. Ancient barangay boats, while remarkably seaworthy, faced storms, pirates, and the constant threat of getting lost in open water. The Datus relied on traditional Austronesian navigation techniques, reading stars, wave patterns, and bird migrations. After weeks at sea, they spotted the mountains of Panay Island rising from the horizon. But Panay wasn't empty. The island was already inhabited by the Ati people, dark-skinned Negrito tribes who had lived there for thousands of years. This is where the story gets interesting, and where different versions diverge dramatically. The traditional account, recorded in the Maragtas, describes a peaceful transaction. The 10 Datus, led by Datu Puti as chief negotiator, approached the Ati chieftain Maracudo. In a legendary exchange, they purchased the lowlands of Panay with a golden salakot, a traditional hat, and a golden necklace for Maracudo's wife, Maniwantiwan. The Ati agreed to move to the mountains, leaving the fertile coastal plains to the newcomers. This story has been repeated in Filipino textbooks for generations. It portrays the founding of Panay as a peaceful, almost idealistic transaction between civilized newcomers and indigenous people. There's even an annual festival in Kalibo, Aklan, the Ati-Atihan, that celebrates this supposed harmonious beginning. But let's be realistic. 10 powerful Datus don't sail hundreds of miles with armed warriors just to politely purchase land with jewelry. The archaeological and anthropological evidence suggests a far more complex and likely violent reality. Consider the power dynamics. The Bornean Datus arrived with superior weapons technology. They had metal-forged swords, spears, and extensive experience in organized warfare. They commanded disciplined fighting forces trained in Southeast Asian combat tactics. The Ati people, while fierce and knowing the terrain intimately, fought with Stone Age weapons and lacked the hierarchical military organization of the Bornean invaders. The peaceful purchase story likely represents a sanitized version of what actually happened, a negotiated surrender after demonstrations of overwhelming force, or perhaps a tributary arrangement where the Ati maintained autonomy in exchange for acknowledging Bornean supremacy. In pre-colonial Southeast Asian warfare, this was common. Show overwhelming strength, offer generous terms, and avoid the costs of prolonged conflict. What we know for certain is that within a generation, the Bornean Datus controlled the most valuable land on Panay. They established 3 major settlements: Irong, which would become modern Iloilo City, Aklan in the north, and Hamtic in the south. Each settlement became the seat of a powerful Datu, governing distinct territories but maintaining alliances through kinship and shared Bornean heritage. Datu Puti himself didn't stay on Panay. According to the chronicles, after ensuring the settlements were secure, he sailed back to Borneo, possibly to report success, possibly to recruit more settlers, or perhaps to settle old scores with Sultan Makatunao. The Maragtas claims he eventually returned and died in Panay, but some versions say he remained in Borneo. Either way, his role as chief negotiator and expedition leader earned him legendary status. The remaining Datus divided Panay among themselves. Datu Sumakwel, the eldest and most respected, became the paramount chief, establishing his seat at Irong Irong. His leadership created what historians call the Confederation of Madya-as, not a centralized kingdom, but a loose alliance of independent datus bound by kinship, trade agreements, and mutual defense pacts. This confederation structure reveals sophisticated political organization. Each Datu governed his territory independently, collecting tribute, administering justice, and commanding local warriors. But they met regularly to settle disputes, coordinate trade, and plan collective defense. This system resembled other Southeast Asian Mandala states, overlapping spheres of influence rather than fixed borders. The social hierarchy they established was complex. At the top sat the Datus and their families, the ruling nobility, who owned the best land and commanded tribute. Below them were the freemen, skilled craftsmen, traders, and farmers who owned property and could bear arms. At the bottom were various classes of dependents and slaves, many captured in raids against neighboring islands or the remaining Ati communities. The Bornean settlers brought Islam's early influences and Hindu-Buddhist cultural elements from their homeland, but these mixed with indigenous animist beliefs. They worshipped a supreme deity called Layon, along with a pantheon of environmental spirits. Babaylans, usually women, served as priestesses, healers, and spiritual advisors, wielding enormous influence in society. Economically, the Datus transformed Panay into a regional power. They established extensive trade networks reaching China, Java, and the Malay kingdoms. Panay became known for its rice surplus, woven textiles, and gold. Chinese traders recorded visiting Ma'i, likely Panay, and described sophisticated harbors, organized markets, and wealthy rulers who traded gold for porcelain and silk. But maintaining this prosperity required constant warfare. The Datus launched regular raids against neighboring islands, capturing slaves and expanding territory. They fought defensive wars against rival chieftains from other islands who envied Panay's wealth. The warrior culture of the Bornean Datus created a militarized society where martial prowess determined social status. The fate of the Ati people remains one of history's tragic footnotes. Pushed into the mountains, they became marginalized in their own homeland. Some were absorbed into the new society through intermarriage or as dependent laborers. Others maintained independence in remote highlands, occasionally raiding lowland settlements. The genetic and cultural legacy of these interactions shaped what would become the Visayan people. By the time Spanish colonizers arrived in the 1500s, Panay's confederation had flourished for over 3 centuries. The Spanish found established kingdoms, literate populations using a native script, and complex legal systems. But they also found political divisions that made conquest easier. The independent Datus could be played against each other, just as the Bornean settlers had likely exploited divisions among the Ati centuries earlier. The story of the 10 Datus matters because it reveals a sophisticated pre-colonial Philippine civilization. These weren't primitive tribes waiting for European enlightenment. They were organized societies with international trade, written laws, and complex governance. The peaceful purchase narrative, while probably mythologized, suggests these societies valued negotiation and legitimacy, not just brute force. Today, the descendants of those Bornean Datus and Ati people form the backbone of Visayan culture. The languages, customs, and social structures they created survived Spanish colonization and American occupation. Every Ati-Atihan festival, every traditional dance, every folk story about ancient Datus carries echoes of that moment in 1212, when 10 boats from Borneo changed an island forever.